Who shows up at a lawyer's office with a child and a question no one's ready to answer? Madelaine wasn't looking for trouble, only a way to protect her daughter from a custody threat she couldn't face alone. But when the powerful, emotionally untouchable Dominic Vance opened the door, he wasn't expecting to see a little girl with eyes that mirrored someone he lost long ago. What began as a routine consultation turned into something far more personal. A collision of memory, silence, and a truth that refuses to stay buried. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. It was the kind of morning New York forgot how to mourn. Wet sidewalks, taxi horns, clouds low enough to press against the skyline. Dominic Vance had already argued 2 cases and made 3 enemies before noon. That was how he liked it. Clean, cold, and distant. So when his assistant buzzed and muttered, "There's a woman here, no appointment, says it's urgent. She has a kid," he didn't flinch. He just said, 5 minutes, and returned to the brief in his hands. Then the door opened. She walked in quietly, holding a little girl by the hand. No legal pads, no documents, just a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder and eyes that said she hadn't slept in a week. She looked out of place. Not unkempt, just too soft for the room. Her daughter clung to her side, clutching a stuffed fox whose seams were nearly worn through. Dominic glanced up. His gaze went from the woman to the child, and stopped. The girl couldn't have been more than 4. She had auburn hair twisted into a messy braid, cheeks flushed pink from the cold, and wide eyes the color of burned amber, unsettlingly familiar. Something in his chest stilled, but his expression didn't crack. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "I need help," Madelaine said calmly. "Legal help, clearly. But as you might imagine, I don't normally handle drop-ins. And I don't do family law. I know who you are, Mr. Vance. Then you know you're wasting your time." She stepped forward anyway. "My ex is trying to file for full custody. He's not the biological father. He's dangerous. I need someone who doesn't flinch when the rules get bent." Dominic narrowed his eyes. "And you think that's me? I think you don't flinch. Period." A long pause followed. Dominic looked again at the child. Still staring. Still quiet. She held his gaze for just a moment too long before hiding behind her mother's coat. He stood slowly, walked toward the window. "I've never seen you before." "No, but I've seen you." He turned. "Excuse me? In court, 2 years ago, you tore a man apart for lying about a nonprofit. You said, 'Silence is just another form of fraud.' That stuck with me." Dominic let the words settle. Then, "What's her name?" "Eliana," Madelaine replied. "Eliana," he repeated, like testing something on his tongue. "And what do you want from me?" "Free representation." "I can pay," she said, but the hesitation in her voice made it a lie. "Not much, but—" "Don't insult either of us," he cut in. Madelaine didn't look away. "She needs to stay with me. That's all I care about." Dominic looked at the girl again. Eliana was now sitting on the edge of a chair, swinging her feet, hugging the fox like it was her anchor. She didn't speak, but her presence filled the room in a way he couldn't define. He rubbed the back of his neck, a rare human gesture. "Do you have the paperwork?" he asked. She reached into her tote and pulled out a folder. Worn, stained at the corner. She handed it to him wordlessly. He opened it. Custody petition. DNA test from the ex. Inconclusive. A restraining order Madelaine had attempted to file but was denied. Her handprint was still faintly on the envelope. Dominic flipped through without comment, then stopped. There was a photo, not of Madelaine, not of Eliana, a hospital wristband. Mother Madelaine, baby girl, no father listed, and just under that, a birthmark description, back of the left shoulder blade, crescent-shaped. He exhaled slowly. How old is she? 4. He walked back to his desk, placing the folder down with care. I want a recess, he muttered. What? A break, he clarified. From arguing cases I don't care about for people I don't respect. She watched him carefully, unsure if it was sarcasm. Then he looked at her. Really looked. Not like a lawyer. Like a man who just saw something he'd spent years pretending didn't exist. I'll take your case, he said. Madelaine's breath caught. Why? Dominic didn't answer. He simply turned to the window again. The city reflected in his eyes like a map he didn't know how to read anymore. Eliana stood up, walked over, and placed her tiny hand on the edge of his desk. Not touching anything, just being there, watching him. When Madelaine tried to pull her back, he lifted a hand gently. Let her. Eliana looked up at him with a tilt of her head that mirrored something he hadn't seen since. He clenched his jaw. We'll start with filing an injunction. I'll need every piece of paper you've ever signed in relation to this man. And I want to meet him. No, Madelaine said quickly. Not alone. You won't be, he replied, then added without thinking. Neither will she. That night, he sat in his office long after everyone had gone. The folder was still open. Eliana's name circled. The photograph faded. The dates lined up too neatly, and the shape of that birthmark would not leave his mind. He didn't sleep, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The courthouse was colder than expected. They sat in the hallway outside family court, a place that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and dread. Madelaine clutched her coat around herself while Eliana sat quietly on the bench beside her, legs swinging, her stuffed fox tucked between them like a small, silent ally. Dominic stood a few paces away, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and clipped. Every movement was deliberate, every word sharp. He didn't glance over once, but Madelaine knew he was aware of everything. How Eliana's feet bounced slightly faster when someone in uniform passed. How her own fingers trembled despite the calm mask on her face. You okay? She asked softly. Eliana nodded. Do I have to talk in the room? No. Just sit next to me. That's all. Dominic ended his call and walked over. Judge Monroe's running behind. Typical. You ready? I don't know, Madelaine admitted. Good. That means you're human. She looked up at him. For a moment, she caught a glimpse of something that looked like reassurance, but it passed too quickly to be certain. Inside the courtroom, the ex was already seated. He looked just like she remembered. Expensive coat, smug expression, hands folded like he already knew the verdict. But his eyes narrowed the second he saw Dominic step in behind them. That wiped the smile right off. Madelaine didn't sit. Not right away. She watched him. The man who had once kissed her wrist and whispered forever. The man who now wanted to rewrite her daughter's name out of her life. Dominic leaned in close. Don't look at him. Look at me. She did. Breathe, he added. Let him be the one who chokes. The hearing began. Custody proceedings were often slow, messy, heavy with procedural jargon. But Dominic cut through it like a scalpel through fabric. He asked the right questions before the judge could, anticipated the other attorney's objections, and didn't once raise his voice. When the opposing counsel questioned Madelaine's financial situation, Dominic interrupted with a printed list of employment records, rent receipts, and character references, including 2 from community leaders who'd worked with her at the shelter. When they tried to suggest she was unstable, Dominic responded with a quiet, "She's raising a 4-year-old who's never missed a day of preschool. How's that for instability?" It wasn't just his confidence. It was the way he spoke, like truth wasn't negotiable. Like he refused to let the system file her into a category she didn't belong in. At one point, Eliana tugged at Madelaine's sleeve and whispered, "Is he always this fast?" She smiled faintly. "Only when it matters." Outside, after the hearing adjourned, Madelaine exhaled as if she hadn't in weeks. "Thank you." Dominic didn't nod or shrug. He simply said, "We bought time. That's all. You'll get a court order to keep her with you for now. But this isn't over. I know. You're not going back to that apartment alone tonight." Madelaine blinked. "Why?" "Because now he knows he's losing." She hesitated. "Where am I supposed to go?" He checked his watch. "There's a secure building I own uptown. Corporate apartments. Not glamorous, but safe." She opened her mouth to argue, but then looked at Eliana, her small hand wrapped tight around her mother's, eyes wide and tired. Madelaine nodded once. "Okay." The apartment was colder than she expected, but clean. Simple furnishings. Neutral colors. A folded card on the counter said Vance Properties. Dominic lingered in the doorway, watching as she set Eliana's coat over the back of the sofa. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "Yes," he replied. "I did." Then he left. Eliana fell asleep quickly. She always did when stress pulled at her small shoulders all day. Madelaine, on the other hand, stood by the window, staring at the city below. Lights flickered like unspoken thoughts. She didn't cry. Not yet. The fear hadn't left. It had simply curled into a quieter shape. The doorbell rang just after 10. She opened it to find Dominic holding a brown paper bag and 2 steaming cups of tea. "I figured you didn't eat." Madelaine stepped aside without a word. They sat at the kitchen counter, eating in silence. "I don't usually bring food to clients," he said eventually. "I don't usually trust lawyers who say things like that." A half smile. "She's strong. That girl of yours." "She had to be." "And you?" he asked. She looked down. "I still flinch sometimes, but less than I used to." Dominic's fingers tapped once against his mug. "That birthmark on her shoulder." Madelaine froze. "I saw it in the file," he continued. "Crescent-shaped. Left side." Her voice barely carried. "What about it?" "My sister had one just like it." Silence thickened between them. Not heavy, but tense. Like a thread pulled too tight. "She died?" Madelaine asked. "She disappeared. 11 years ago." Never confirmed. "But she was everything." Madelaine's lips parted, but she didn't speak. "She used to say," Dominic added, "some things don't need blood to be real. But if you see yourself in someone's laugh, don't let them go. She sounds like someone worth remembering." She was. They didn't talk much after that. He left a few minutes later. No goodbyes. Just a glance that lingered longer than it should have. After the door clicked shut, Madelaine returned to Eliana's room. Her daughter was still curled beneath the blanket, fingers loosely holding the fox. She brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. And for the first time in days, she whispered something not meant for anyone else to hear. "Maybe he's not what I thought." Down the hallway, Dominic paused outside the elevator, his reflection staring back at him in the polished chrome. He didn't recognize the man looking back, but he didn't look away either. The next morning, Madelaine found a note slipped under the door. "Court filing complete. Injunction granted. Next step, strategy." Beneath it, a postscript in smaller writing. "If the radiator wheezes again, call the number on the fridge. Not me. Unless it's urgent." She smiled without meaning to. Eliana had already poured cereal and was humming tunelessly, barefoot in her princess pajamas. The calm in the room felt temporary but real. By noon, Dominic was back. Not in his suit this time. He wore a dark sweater and jeans, somehow making him look more distant than ever. Like he had removed his armor and wasn't sure who he was underneath. "You said strategy," Madelaine said, folding her arms. "We need to dig," he replied. "Your ex has connections, money, and if he's as controlling as you say, he's playing a longer game. I need leverage. I don't have anything like that." "You might." She hesitated. "There was a phone. Old one. I kept it even after I left." "Where is it?" "In a storage bin. Basement. Downtown." Dominic didn't flinch. "Let's go." She stared at him. Now? No one ever beats men like him by waiting. The storage unit smelled of dust, metal, and old decisions. Eliana waited in the car with one of Dominic's junior associates, a woman named Callie with kind eyes and a soft voice. Madelaine dug through the bins with Dominic at her side, cardboard scraping her hands, the air heavy with silence. "This is what my life used to be," she murmured, holding up a chipped snow globe. "Packable. Erasable." Dominic didn't respond. He reached past her and pulled out a shoebox taped shut with layers of masking tape. "What's that?" she asked. "I don't know, but it has that look." Inside were receipts, notes. One photo, her ex shaking hands with a man in a judge's robe. She stared at it. "Is that?" "It's a contact. Possibly a favor owed." Dominic slid the photo into a folder. "This is leverage." Back in the car, Eliana leaned her head against the window. Callie had given her a lollipop. The red stain on her chin looked like a badge of defiance. They dropped Madelaine and her daughter off at the apartment by late afternoon. As she turned to say goodbye, Dominic paused. "She didn't flinch," he said. "Eliana." She looked at me in the rearview mirror. Like she wanted to say something but didn't need to. Madelaine lowered her voice. "She watches everything. Doesn't always speak. But when she does, it matters." Dominic nodded. "Let me know if you find anything else. Or if she does." That night, Madelaine couldn't sleep. She sat on the couch flipping through the old phone. Deleted messages. Static voicemails. A recording she didn't remember saving. She pressed play. Her ex's voice. Slurred. Angry. Accusing her of stealing someone else's kid. Then something darker. "You think I don't know? You think I don't see the hair? The eyes? You think he doesn't?" She froze. He knew. She saved the file and emailed it. No subject. Just a single line. "You were right. I just didn't want you to be." The next morning, Dominic showed up without knocking. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "You kept that from me. I didn't know I had it. You should have told me." She didn't defend herself. Just looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, he looked tired enough to let her. "I wasn't hiding it from you," she said. "I was hiding it from myself." He sat down. At her table. In her space. "I talked to someone last night," he said. "About the blood test. It can be done without her even noticing. Just a cheek swab. Quick. Non-invasive." Madelaine's heart stumbled. "You want a test?" "I don't know what I want," he said honestly. "But I keep seeing that mark. That same crescent. She has your eyes." "I know." Silence opened between them. Not tense this time. Just vast. Then Eliana came padding into the room, barefoot again, hair wild from sleep. She looked at Dominic, blinked once, then said, "I had a dream you brought pancakes." He exhaled a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "Well, then I guess I better go get some." "You can sit there," she added, pointing to the chair beside her. "That one doesn't wobble." Dominic obeyed without question. Madelaine watched them, the way he moved more carefully around her now. The way Eliana didn't shrink from him anymore. The way something fragile and new was learning how to breathe. After breakfast, he took the cup she handed him and ran his thumb gently along the rim. "Did you want the test?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He looked up. "Only if you do. I don't need it to believe it." "I might," he said. "Not to prove she's mine, but to prove I still exist in something." Madelaine swallowed hard. Then let's do it. The next day, she took Eliana to the clinic. Dominic didn't go inside. He waited in the car. She didn't ask why. She understood. When they came out, Eliana was chewing gum and proudly holding a sticker that said, "I was brave today." Dominic reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded square of paper. "What's this?" she asked. "A treasure map," he said. Eliana's eyes widened. "Does it lead to pancakes?" "Something better." She grinned. Madelaine looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied. "But she did." That evening, Madelaine stood by the window again. Outside, the streetlight flickered. A cab pulled up, but no one got out. She leaned her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. In the silence, she imagined a different life. One where fear wasn't always knocking. One where a man like Dominic didn't have to learn love through blood and courtrooms. One where someone stayed. Behind her, Eliana's soft voice broke the quiet. "Do you think he'll still be here tomorrow?" Madelaine turned. "I think he wants to be." And that for now was enough. The email arrived at 2:17 a.m. Madelaine woke to the faint buzz of her phone on the nightstand. She didn't check it right away. The kind of messages that came in the middle of the night rarely brought peace. But the subject line was unmistakable. Paternity results confidential. She stared at it, not moving, not breathing. The words hovered like glass between what was and what would be. It took her 10 minutes to open the file. Another 5 to read the single sentence that changed nothing and everything. Probability of paternity, 99.94%. The room stayed silent. So did she. Not because she was shocked, but because, deep down, she already knew. At 7:45, Dominic stood outside her door holding 2 coffees and a folded newspaper he didn't intend to read. When she opened it, he saw the truth in her face before she spoke. "I know," he said. Madelaine stepped back to let him in. No ceremony. No questions. Eliana was still asleep, curled into the corner of the couch with the stuffed fox tucked under her chin. Dominic set the coffee on the counter and leaned against the sink. "I should say something," he murmured. "You don't have to." "I want to." Madelaine folded her arms. "Okay. I didn't expect this," he began. "But now that I know, I can't go back to not knowing." "She's not a burden," Madelaine said, voice tightening. "I know. And I'm not asking anything from you." "I know." "Then what do you want, Dominic?" He looked at her. Not like a lawyer. Not like a man chasing control. But like someone standing in the middle of a storm, just trying to stay still. "I want a second chance," he said. Her heart knocked once, hard. "At what?" "At being something more than what I've been." She let the words hang there. Weightless. Terrifying. "I don't know what that looks like," she whispered. "Neither do I," he said. "But maybe we figure it out one cup of tea at a time." Later that morning, he knelt beside Eliana and handed her a tiny wooden box with a brass clasp. "What is it?" she asked, blinking sleep from her eyes. "Open it." Inside was a compass. Not plastic. Real. The kind you carry when maps aren't enough. Eliana turned it in her hands like it was treasure. "Sometimes," Dominic said, "even grown-ups get lost." "This helps." She smiled up at him. "So we don't lose you?" He didn't answer right away. "No," he said finally. "So I don't lose myself." That afternoon, Dominic canceled 3 meetings and walked the city on foot. He didn't call anyone. Didn't check emails. Just let the cold burn his face and remind him he was still here. He passed a bookstore window and stopped. There, on display, was a children's book he remembered from his own childhood. A story about a fox who wanted to be part of a family but didn't know how. The coincidence felt too perfect. He went inside, bought it, and had it wrapped in brown paper. That night, Madelaine made soup. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, and Dominic didn't stop her when she placed a bowl in front of him. They didn't talk about the test again. Instead, Eliana read aloud from the book about the fox, her small voice careful and proud. At one point, she looked up and whispered, "He's just like mine," pressing her face to the worn stuffed animal. When she fell asleep, Madelaine sat down beside Dominic on the couch. Their shoulders didn't touch, but the space between them felt different now. So, she said, breaking the silence, "What now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never done this before." "Parenting?" "No. Letting someone in." She looked at him gently. "It's not supposed to feel easy. Does it feel right?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for the empty teacup on the table, ran her thumb along the rim the same way he did. "I think," she said, "it feels like the beginning." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. When he stood to leave, she walked him to the door. Neither said goodnight. It wasn't necessary. He paused before stepping into the hallway. "You said she's not a burden," he murmured. "She's not." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe I was the one who needed her." 3 weeks later, the hearing was over. Madelaine stood in the hallway of the courthouse with Eliana asleep on her shoulder, her small body heavy with relief. The judge's words still echoed in her ears like a lullaby spoken in legalese. "Full custody remains with the mother. Petition for review denied." It was done. Dominic stood beside her, his expression unreadable, one hand resting lightly on her back, the other holding the now familiar legal folder that had carried more than just paperwork. "You should go celebrate," he said. She looked at him. "Aren't you coming?" "I'm not good at cake and confetti." "You don't have to be good," she replied. "Just there." His mouth twitched at the corner. "That's a dangerous invitation. So don't answer it unless you mean to." Outside, the wind caught her coat and he instinctively reached to steady it. His hand lingered for a moment longer than it needed to. "Let me drive you," he said. She nodded. In the car, Eliana stirred in the back seat but didn't wake. Dominic adjusted the mirror to watch her sleep, something tender and unfamiliar in his eyes. Madelaine noticed. "You keep looking at her like she's about to vanish." He didn't deny it. "I keep thinking I've missed too much to matter." She doesn't see it that way. He glanced at her. "And you. I think she's smarter than both of us." They stopped at a quiet diner, the kind with paper menus and windows that steamed over. Dominic ordered pancakes without hesitation. Eliana cheered softly in her sleep at the smell. Madelaine watched him across the table, the way his guard slipped more each time he was near her daughter. The way he listened, really listened, like words mattered again. Halfway through the meal, he reached into his coat and slid a small envelope across the table. She frowned. "What's this?" "Something I was going to send. Then I didn't." Inside was a note. Handwritten. In his usually tight, professional script, but messier. More human. "You changed the trajectory of something I didn't know could move." She folded it gently and said nothing. Her throat was too tight. That night, as they walked back to the car, Eliana held both their hands. Hers, warm and small. His, careful and steady. Madelaine looked up at the city lights, breathing in the cold. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" she asked. "All the time." "And what do you do?" Dominic squeezed her hand slightly. "Decide whether to keep it." At her apartment, she hesitated in the doorway. Eliana was already curled up inside, watching a cartoon with the volume turned low. Madelaine turned to him. "You can come in." "I shouldn't." "But do you want to?" He nodded once. "More than I should." She stepped aside. Inside, the light was soft. Familiar. Real. He hung up his coat and sat beside her on the couch, not too close, not too far. Just there. Present. "I brought something," he said quietly, reaching into a paper bag. It was the book. The one about the fox. But this time it was wrapped in new paper and tucked between the pages was a photo. Of Eliana. Taken in the diner. Smiling. Madelaine looked at him. "I thought maybe," he said, "this time the fox doesn't have to wander." She blinked. "Are you saying you want to stay?" "I'm saying I already did." They sat there for a while, saying nothing more. Later, when Eliana had fallen asleep in Dominic's lap, her head against his chest, her fingers tangled in his shirt, Madelaine returned from the kitchen and stood in the doorway just watching them. He looked up at her. She crossed the room slowly, knelt in front of them, and laid her hand gently over his. No declarations. No promises. Just that. And in the stillness, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that some families don't begin with blood. They begin with a knock on the door, with a child who looks like a mirror you forgot existed, with a woman who never expected anyone to stay, and a man who finally did.